Good morning and welcome to the Water Rationing Plan webinar brought to you by the Department of Healthcare Access and Information, otherwise known as HCAI. You may download the handout for today's presentation in the Go To panel under the Handouts section. We're scheduled to be here for 1 hour today. We have a lot of information to cover, so we will not have time for a question and answer session during the webinar. But if you have any questions during the presentation, please email them to seismiccomplianceunit@hcai.ca.gov. That's seismiccomplianceunit@hcai.ca.gov. If you experience technical difficulties during the presentation, please close the webinar and rejoin using the login information that was sent to you by GoTo when you registered for this presentation. Today's presenter is Kamal Khalsi, Senior Structural Engineer of the Seismic Compliance Unit. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I'll now hand the presentation over to Kamal.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on the water rationing plan. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone who has been involved with helping with this task of NPC5 upgrades. And this includes Ali Sumer, Rahul Rana, Larry Enright, and Clara Wu here at HCAI. And I also want to thank CDPH for all their help in providing guidance in preparing and now helping with reviewing all these water rationing plans. Since this work is related to providing services after an emergency, having CDPH expertise on services and functions in the hospital has helped us address some of these challenges and questions that we are dealing with for the first time. On this slide, you can see some of the recent and upcoming webinars. I've also included the NPC5 webinar from 2023 for reference as it's relevant to today's discussion. Recently, Elise Sumer gave webinars on seismic grant program for small and rural hospital. Another one on seismic compliance plan and delays beyond 2030 deadline. And the most recent one was the NPC compliance webinar. Today's webinar is on water rationing plan. Another upcoming webinar on April 2nd is on SPC compliance. I recommend reviewing the previous webinar on NPC5 water rationing plan that was presented in August of 2023. That was a 2-hour webinar and it went into much more details regarding the NPC5 code requirements, evaluation, and report preparation. Today's webinar will focus on the submitted evaluation reports and discuss ongoing water rationing strategies, challenges, approaches, some frequently asked questions, and also we'll try to go over some examples. Let's go over some relevant codes and their effective dates. To clarify one thing, there is no change to the NPC regulations. The final, no change to NPC regulations for this upcoming code. The final express terms for California Administrative Code were filed with the Secretary of State on February 27. These regulations will become effective on March 29th, 2025. That's 30 days after filing. Since today is the 27th, this will be effective like 2 days from now. In this presentation, we'll go over the relevant upcoming changes in the 2025 California Administrative Code, especially pertaining to timelines. One important thing to note is the 2025 Building Code is effective January 1, 2026. So there is this important distinction. California Administrative Code will be effective in 2 days, end of March, and the California Building Code will be effective January 1, 2026. Now let's go over some upcoming deadlines as outlined in the Building Code. This slide shows the 2024 requirement that has already passed. The deadline that passed last year on January 1, 2024 was the requirement to submit evaluation reports for each non-compliant building for NPC4 or NPC4D and NPC5 that are planning to remain operational beyond 2030. For the non-compliant buildings that are planning to be removed from acute care, that is decommissioned or demolished, the evaluation consists of a letter signed by the hospital administrator indicating the intent to remove from acute care. The next upcoming deadline is January 1, 2026. All non-compliant buildings that plan to remain operational beyond 2030 shall submit a compliance plan. Also, if the hospital is seeking a delay, they shall submit a seismic compliance plan and a delay application to HCAI by January 1, 2026. You can refer to the HCAI PIN 80 and AB 869 for more details on this. One thing to note is that the pins and guides sometimes have regular updates made with newer versions posted on our website. So we always recommend going to our website to look for the latest version. The recent webinar by Alisuma that goes over the seismic compliance plans and delay applications and timeline is in much more detail. You can access the handout and watch the video on our of the presentation on our website under the past webinars. The next deadline after that is March 1, 2026 for submitting construction documents. Related to NPC 4, 4D, and NPC 5 to the office. Note that the deadline has changed from previously being January 1 to now March 1. This change is part of the upcoming 2025 California Administrative Code. For the facilities submitting delay application per AB 869, this deadline does not change. Similarly, for non-conforming buildings that are proposed to be removed from acute care, that is, the plan is to decommission or demolish, that the facility shall submit RAC's construction project. If there is no construction, then this step can be skipped. The next deadline after that is March 1, 2028 to obtain a building permit to begin construction for the NPC compliance projects. Again, please note the change in the date from January to March of 2028. There are some exceptions in the code, but in general, the hospitals not meeting this deadline are not issued a building permit except for seismic compliance work, maintenance work, or emergency repairs. You can find these exceptions under the 2025 California Administrative Code section listed here on the slide. Similarly, for facilities submitting a delay application per AB 869, this deadline does not change. For non-compliant buildings planning to be removed from acute care services, the RAC's construction project building permit needs to be obtained by March 1, 2028. So by January 1, 2030, the general acute care building shall achieve NPC 5 rating. That means finish construction, obtain a certificate of occupancy, and shall receive the NPC 5 rating. For buildings with approved delay dates per AB 869, they will need to meet the deadline as outlined and approved under their specific seismic compliance and delay plan. Again, as a reminder, these requirements only apply to facilities with non-compliant buildings. Compliant buildings are the ones with SPC 3 or higher rating and NPC 5 rating. Let's briefly go over NPC 5 and its main requirements before we jump into the water rationing plans. For a building rating to be NPC 5, the building needs to comply with a minimum NPC 4 or NPC 4D rating. You can see this section from the California Administrative Code here outlining this criteria. For a building to be NPC 5, the building has to be NPC 4 or 4D first. And in addition to this, it has to have a sufficient on-site supply of water, wastewater, and fuel to provide for radiological and acute care operations. This helps the hospital to be operational without outside support for 72 hours and provide emergency services in case of earthquake or other disaster. An NPC 5 compliant hospital facility is capable of supporting 72 hours of emergency operations during widespread damage caused by major earthquake. With all major earthquakes, we have seen damage to not only buildings, but critical public infrastructure as well. The intent is to treat the hospital facility as an isolated place that is self-sufficient and reasonably capable of providing services after disaster. This is especially critical in the initial time before help from outside can start. So what does being reasonably capable of providing services to public mean? for our purposes here, we are looking at these main items: water storage, which is part of the water rationing plan, wastewater storage, radiological services, and fuel storage for e-power or for the emergency generator. Then on individual building level, we want to look at bracing, and last but not least, the structural performance of the building. SVC3 or higher rating is considered a compliant building. Again, our presentation today is going to go over a portion of the NPC requirements, NPC5 requirements that are specifically related to water and wastewater. The code requirements are listed across multiple locations. California Administrative Code provides definition of NPC5 building under Table 11.1 and also timelines and deadlines under Section 1.5.2. California Building Code has NPC5 requirements for new construction. California Plumbing Code has information on the minimum water requirements under Chapter 6, and it has the wastewater requirements under Chapter 7. Similarly, California Electrical Code provides references to the NFPA 101 and 110 for the on-site fuel requirements. Just briefly talking about tanker truck exceptions. This is an important exception in the code that's being utilized under multiple proposed rationing plans. This exception allows for replenishment of water as long as minimum of 24 hours of water is provided on site, and the contracts with vendors are made for the second and third day to maintain 72 hours of continued operations. We'll go more in details later on the tanker trucks and vendors in today's presentation. Now going over some updates and improvements we have made recently to the NPC5 application process. The original applications were submitted for each building separately. To help streamline the application process, since the initial submission, we have made further improvements to allow for single primary NPC5 project that is related to multiple buildings. This effort will save time in long term and simplify the process. When submitting back check responses, please use the primary project number. Except for the primary project number, all other project numbers are voided. So when submitting the rationing plan, please be clear in mentioning all the buildings the evaluation report applies to. Essentially, all general acute care buildings that plan to remain operational beyond 2030 need to be NPC5. This includes canopies, equipment yards that might not require water, wastewater, or fuel. Just to clarify why we are asking for this is because we don't know if these canopies or structures require water or e-power. It might be obvious for the facility or the design professional familiar with the facility. So the design professional can state that these structures don't require connection to water, wastewater, or fuel, but as long as it's included in an NPC5 report, that should be good. On your side, there are many ways to confirm as a design professional or owner that all the buildings are included and no building was accidentally missed. You can check Excella for all related buildings under your parent project number. You can check HCAI facility web page to see if the report for the building was submitted or not under the NPC status. I'll go over this a little more in detail on a later slide, since there is some good information on this webpage. Another option is to look at the remarks letter that was issued, as it provides a list of all the buildings related to the NPC5 upgrade project. If you see any building missing, please update your report or reach out to us in case we missed it. We want to make sure that for each facility, all non-compliant acute care buildings have NPC4 and NPC5 evaluation report submitted, or there is an intent to RACS letter submitted. For the few remaining facilities that might be submitting NPC5 upgrade for the first time using the electronic application, you will notice that you can only include one building as part of the application process. We recommend you include the list of the remaining buildings under the project scope, and we will assign them to the related buildings for the NPC project. You can always go and check the current status of the NPC evaluation reports on our website. The link is shown here. Let's see a few different examples and how you can check the NPC status. The first row shows a scenario where the facility owner has decided to remove the building from general acute care by 2030. As such, the intent letter stating the intent to remove from acute care was submitted and received by our office. In the second row, you can see the NPC status description showing NPC 4 report was submitted and accepted. NPC 5 report review was completed, which means it's now in the design team's quote. The third row is an example in which building in the campus was not included in the submitted NPC 5 report. Now, if this was accidentally missed, please update the report included. Since the building is already NPC 4, the evaluation report for NPC 4 or 4D is not required. Therefore, there is no mention of it on the status there, and only NPC 5 status is mentioned. The last row is an example of a compliant building, so there is no NPC 4 or 5 evaluation required. Hence, there is nothing shown on the NPC status column. Now let's get started with our main topic of the presentation, water rationing plans. Let's take a quick minute to go over why we are discussing water rationing plans. If you recall, the code minimum requirement is 50 gallons per bed per day. But in reality, a hospital facility uses a large amount of water on a daily basis. As you can see, most of the facilities are greater than 200 gallons of water per bed per day. I would say 400 to 500 gallons per bed per day is more of a typical ballpark usage for facilities with more than 100 beds approximately. Sometimes providing such large tank is unfeasible due to the space or financial constraints. And moreover, we understand there will be lower water usage in an emergency. Things in an emergency are different from normal operations. The focus will shift and be on critical and emergency care, and other non-critical service will not be given the same priority. One thing we noticed in the submitted reports with existing water usage is that small rural facilities have lower water usage when compared to large urban hospitals. And hospitals that are controlling temperature with water-cooled systems use significantly more water than air-cooled systems. The water usage is larger for inland facilities where the water is more extreme. So this is just giving a kind of a big picture of water usage of facilities that we have seen so far. We have an A5 guide on our website to help you prepare the water rationing plans. This was originally published in August 2022, I believe. We went in detail on preparing the NPC 5 reports and going over the A5 guide in our previous webinar, which was in 2023. So I'll not repeat that information here. We recommend always going to our website to look for the latest version of this A5 guide. The current version is from May 2024. There are no new requirements in this revised A5 guide. We did make some minor editorial changes. The e-power discussion on cooling equipment is clarified under this new version, and I'll go over it later on in the presentation in more detail. So when discussing water rationing plans specifically, these are the documents that are required to support the evaluation report. The first item is existing water usage bill. This sets up the benchmark and brings into perspective the actual water usage under normal conditions. We recommend including an executive summary, which helps understand the proposal more uniformly since there are multiple aspects to an evaluation report and goes in very detail, and sometimes important information could get hidden in the whole report. In this executive summary, we would like you to include the existing water or water storage on site if there is any, the source of emergency water supply, whether it is on-site tank or well supply, any proposed future construction for water storage where existing water storage is insufficient, what is the anticipated water usage in emergency. This would be based on the water rationing plan itself, and also include if there are any tanker truck proposed as part of the replenishment option. Within the water rationing plan, we'd like you to include the impacted services in the building. This is the portion that's very closely reviewed by CDPH, which is the licensing agency. Other calculations related to temperature control or supporting calculations to identify water usage shall be submitted for review. We don't require plans for evaluation report, but if submitting floor plans help understand your rationing plan, you can attach them in the report. Now going into some examples. In the next few slides, I'll go over a few examples of the typical water rationing plans we have seen proposed and the approaches used to conserve water. As you can see on this slide, we have examples divided into four categories. These categories try to address the typical rationing reports we have received. The first example is no water rationing. Then second is with limited rationing. Third example is significant rationing through temperature control. And the last is a significant rationing example with direct impact on services. In all the examples, to show the different levels of rationing, we considered a 120 licensed bed general acute care facility having its water consumption at approximately 61,600 gallons per day, which is based on the maximum monthly average. The minimum code requirements for this example facility for the on-site water tank, it would be based on the facility's water rationing plan, but the tank itself cannot be less than 5,000 gallons. Or 50 gallons per day multiplied by the bed count multiplied by the number of days. So for a 3-day on-site requirement, it comes out to be, in our case, 18,000 gallons, and for 1 day where vendors are chosen as water replenishment option, it comes out to be 6,000 gallons on site. When submitting water rationing plans for the existing campus, please send us the most recent annual water bill. In case of unusual peaks or low outliers in the water bill, you can provide us justification. Sometimes there is ongoing construction or a leak that might cause unusual volume of water usage in a month. But providing at least 1 year of water bill helps us understand the variation through the months. When working on water rationing plan, the gallons per day from the highest water month consumption should be used. As this is already an average over a month, natural disasters can happen any time of the year. So choosing an average of annual consumption would underestimate the water usage in peak summer months, especially when the peak is, significantly higher for facilities using water for cooling and are located more inland where the weather is more extreme. So in this example of no rationing, with the water bill of showing 61,600 gallons per day, let's assume the facility has space to install this. So it comes out to be 184,800 gallons for the 3-day on-site tank requirement. Now, assuming 10 to 15% extra for the unusable quantity, which is typical per manufacturer recommendations, this roughly translates to 205,000 gallon tank for both water and wastewater. Again, for this example, the facility has an option to propose using vendors for the second and third day by using the code exemptions. We recommend the facility perform their due diligence before proposing to use vendors. The most common tanker truck size we have seen is 4,000 gallons, which is readily available. Limiting the refilling option frequency to be no less than 2 hours. The maximum water that can be delivered on site in 24 hours is approximately 48,000 gallons. We understand some cases are unique, but when proposing unusually large tanker size, we might need further documentation to confirm the proposal. Performing a quick check with this 48,000 gallon refilling limit per day, we can see that the on-site first 24-hour tank size requirement is approximately 88,800 gallons. Um, in your specific case, the vendor might only be able to deliver 30,000 gallon or maybe 60,000 gallons per day. So this is something specific to your site and should be reviewed prior to proposing the site plan. The rationing plan, I meant. Please note that the tank size shall be larger than the 24-hour water requirement for the first 24-hour water requirement for the facility. You can try to have a contract with a vendor to have it delivered before 24 hours, but the minimum code requirement is to sustain 24 hours of operation with on-site water supply. So the tanks shall be sized at a minimum to sustain 24 hours of operation without tanker trucks from outside. We get approximately 100,000 gallon on-site tank requirement when we account for a unusable quantity in this case. Since this water rationing proposal relies on continuing operations with delivery trucks, these contracts shall be in place prior to NPC 5 request. So in this first example, it was without any water rationing. The evaluation report for such category shall clearly indicate there is no water rationing proposed and there is no impact on services. In such reports, there is no CDPH review necessary since there is no impact on services, and HCAI review will be minimum as we are just making sure that the existing water bill is accurate and covers all the buildings on campus. Now, for example 2, in this example, the water rationing is limited, but there is no general impact on acute care services provided by the facility. There could be many ways to achieve this, but we will go over the most common methods we have seen so far. The water rationing could be targeted where the reduction is limited to non-GSE buildings for or irrigation. Now, if the design professional through calculations or water meter data can quantify the non-GSE and irrigation demand, the on-site tanks can be sized for the remaining demand. For irrigation, we recommend confirming the water supply is not through a separate meter, as it's very common to have irrigation water supply separately. For reducing water by discounting non-GSE buildings, the water consumption between non-GSE versus GSE buildings can be estimated by full-time employees, square footage, services provided, plumbing fixtures, etc. Due to the type of the services provided, GSE buildings typically have higher water consumption per square foot compared to non-GSE buildings. So this should be properly accounted for in the supplemental calculations, unless there is meter data to justify the breakdown. So in our example, let's say with the supporting calculations, we were able to reduce the water from 61,600 gallons to 48,400 gallons. Again, using the same methodology, the 3-day water demand is 145,200 gallons, which roughly translates to 160,000 gallon usable tank. Now, if proposing vendors for second and third day, doing the same calculation, the tanker truck replenishment not exceeding 48,000 gallons per day, the minimum tank size for the first 24 hours come out to be 49,200 gallons. Again, make sure that this size is larger than the first 24-hour demand, which in our case is 48,400 gallons. Now, this would translate approximately to 55,000 gallon usable tank when accounting for the unusable quantity. Again, this proposal relies on delivery trucks. These contracts shall be in place prior to NPC 5 request. So in summary, example 2 was with limited water rationing. The rationing was carefully targeted for non-acute care buildings or irrigation without any impact to general acute care services. The evaluation report for such categories shall clearly indicate that there is no impact on the services, and the water rationing is limited to non-essential usage that can be temporarily shut off during an emergency. And this should be part of the facility emergency plan. In such cases, again, no CDPH review is necessary since there is no impact on services. HCAI will be limited to verifying the supporting calculations that are submitted to justify this reduction in the non-acute care water usage side. Now let's go over example 3. In this, we are targeting rationing through temperature control. Most facilities rely on water cooling system to maintain temperature on their campus. For inland facilities where weather is extreme, there is large water consumption in cooling towers. With regular blowdowns and evaporative losses, this can be significant source of water usage. Targeted temperature control is another strategy that could be used to reduce water consumption. Please note at a minimum, the facility should provide industrial water to heat, cool, and humidify operating rooms and temperature-sensitive drugs and medical supplies. So shutting down cooling to the entire hospital is not an option, as it will mean that the operating rooms and temperature-sensitive drugs don't have temperature control. One of the most common methods used in calculating water demand for temperature control or water used by cooling or heating is the 8760 bin and weather analysis by the mechanical engineers. These calculations can be performed based on the nearest site's available temperature and humidity recordings. Again, understanding the facility operating standards such as the frequency of blowdowns, the target room temperature set by facility, the equipment information is also important in calculating the water usage. You can eliminate blowdowns during emergencies to conserve water, but calculating the percent of consumption of an existing bill, it's important to understand what the facility standards are to calculate that volume. For our example, let's say the detailed analysis, we were able to reduce the water usage to 38,720 gallons. This is by limiting cooling to selected regions and maintaining cooling at the minimum required locations. When limiting cooling to certain regions to conserve water during emergency, please provide a overall layout for chillers, cooling towers, air handlers serving the rooms and departments. When providing extreme reduction in loads, provide relevant equipment cut sheets to justify the minimal operatable load for these equipments, because some of these can't run under certain load. If there is any other construction required to achieve this transition, please list it under the water rationing plan. Just limiting cooling to OR and pharmacy might not be feasible, as the system might provide temperature control over a larger area. Some construction might be required or needed to target specific rooms to achieve this. So using the same methodology, the 3-day on-site demand approximately comes to 130,000 gallon tank when you account for the unusable quantity. Again, if the proposal is using vendors for second and third day, this translates to roughly a 45,000 gallon tank on site. Again, these contracts shall be in place prior to NPC 5 request. For water rationing plans with such proposal using temperature control, please identify under which department. I'm sorry, I heard a beep. Can you hear me, Kelly?
Yes, I'm having no issues hearing you, Kamal.
Thank you. I've lost my chain of thought there. Sorry. For water rationing plans, that use temperature control, please identify under which department temperature control is impacted. The table shown here is from the A5 guide. The idea to provide a separate column for temperature control was that it does not mix with the direct impact on services, especially in cases if only temperature control is implemented as part of the rationing measure. The California Mechanical Code Table 4A provides acceptable temperature and humidity range for the rooms. It's included as a footnote under this table for reference. Now, in such water rationing plans, CDPH review is minimal. HCAI review will be comprehensive to verify the supporting calculations. Please submit any assumptions made in the calcs that's needed for a review. Make sure to address the plan for infection control for CDPH when limiting cooling. with higher temperature, the risk of infection increases. So proper infection control measures should be in place, and these can be provided by the facility for CDPH review. Now let's look at another example in which significant water rationing is proposed with a direct impact on GOC services. This could be required due to space or financial constraints for not being able to put larger tank size. Note that this is not the same as minimum code requirement of 50 gallons per day per bed. The amount of water required shall be based on the facility's emergency operation plan and the associated water rationing plan to provide 72 hours of operation. Some examples for direct water usage reduction, calculating emergency water usage by plumbing fixtures based on the estimates such as number of patients, doctors, nurses, daytime versus nighttime staff, or any other support staff. You can try to estimate the plumbing water requirement. It might be tricky sometimes, but this is where having discussions with facilities helps putting some numbers together. Limiting ORs, this is something that will be reviewed by CDPH on a case-by-case basis. It is understandable to have limited ORs running only for critical patients during an emergency. You can propose something such as 5 out of 8 or 10 out of 20 ORs will plan to remain operational. Like more extreme case, having 1 OR out of 10 might not sound like an operational plan, but again, this is something CDPH will review. This reduction in operating rooms under emergency could be based on the fact that you can efficiently only provide cooling to certain limited ORs, and providing cooling to other ORs might have large impact on your water tank size, or other facility considerations might be relevant. But you can propose some reduced quantity if that is the plan. But please be clear on what total number of ORs are in the facility and what's proposed to remain operational. Similarly, you can look at limiting sterilizer runs to support the limited ORs, limiting number of dialysis provided each day, changing dietetic plans to use ready-to-eat meals. If the facility has dry food, transitioning could help reduce the water required to make meals. You can switch to bottled waters. Sometime emergency operation plan, limits 1 visitor per patient. So this can reduce water consumption load on the kitchen. Limiting or transferring, outpatient services to another facility, or limiting clinical lab and radiological services to emergency use only. These are a few of the options to look at. When choosing this rationing method, please provide a detailed description of the impact on all services, basic, supplemental support services alongside the proposed emergency plan. When an emergency happens, continuing operations as normal is not practical, and there will be impact on provided services. So if you list all the reductions in capacity or services and modifications to the staff procedures, this would help us NCDPH review your plan. We also recommend reviewing the CDPH policy and procedure checklist that is attached in an appendix to the A5 guide. Again, we are asking you to tell us what you're expecting to remain functional or partially functional or not functional. If there are areas that you can do without, like admin spaces, then you can reduce water over there. But when it comes to basic services, just saying we're going to discontinue this service might, or saying that we're going to go dry, CDPH is pushing back on those statements. So we recommend looking at these services and aiming for something less, not eliminate, but provide services in a reduced capacity if it helps conserve water. Again, to emphasize, the section shall be filled by the facility representative or a design professional based on the input from facility. The impact on the survey shall reflect the proposed reduction in water usage. As you can probably guess, for such evaluation reports, both CDPH and HCAI reviews are going to be comprehensive. For our example, let's say with this detailed water usage breakdown and proposed rationing, we reduced the water usage to 21,600 gallons. You can see how it started from no water rationing from 61,600 gallons to extreme rationing with impact on services to 21,600 gallons. When targeting reduction in water usage with impact on services, please provide a detailed breakdown as shown. This table is in A5 guide for reference. Also includes the proposed percentage reduction for each water usage. This helps us correlate the proposed impact on services. One thing to note here is that for wastewater tanks, you can eliminate blowdowns and reduce the storage requirement to 19,000 gallons in this case, this specific example. You can also target other water uses that might not go downstream to wastewater. For this case, 3-day on-site requirement, translates to 72,000 gallon water and 65,000 gallon wastewater tank when accounting for the unusable quantity. Again, choosing the code exemption and using vendors for second and third day, this would translate to 24,000 gallon water and 21,000 gallon wastewater usable tank size. Again, these contracts shall be in place prior to NPC 5 request. This slide is just summarizing how, depending on facilities' needs and requirements, the water wastewater tank size can vary. As you can see, the maximum tank size was 205,000 gallon for water and wastewater with no rationing, and it goes down to 24,000 gallon tank for water and 21,000 gallon tank for wastewater, with tanker trunk contracts when choosing more significant water conservation measures. And similarly, the depth of the review from CDPH and HCAI depends on how much water is rationed. All these examples focused on existing building. With existing building, we have a water bill to give us an idea on the water usage. But how to estimate water for new construction? A similar concept applies to new construction as well. Water usage can be calculated based on the proposed departments, plumbing fixtures, square footage, equipment usage, and other services. We have some guidance on our A5 guide to help you calculate the usage. Again, as a reminder, your typical normal usage is 400 to 500 gallons per day per licensed bed for a typical hospital facility. So when proposing a smaller volume of usage, please make sure the impact on services is reflected proportionally. We have this we have this slide to help clarify the impact of new construction on deadlines in existing campus. For new buildings in an existing campus that are going to complete construction prior to 1/1/2030, the new building shall be NPC 5 prior to getting occupancy as part of the California Building Code requirement. If proposing vendors, these contracts also need to be in place. For the existing campus, NPC 5 compliance shall be achieved by 1/1/2030. Now, if there are tanks are the same, you can tie them to the campus building and achieve NPC 5 rating for the campus. Again, if they're vendors, these need to be in place, the contracts. Now, if a building construction completion in an existing campus is after 1/1/2030, the new building shall be NPC 5 prior to getting occupancy. But the existing campus, NPC 5 shall be NPC 5 compliance shall be achieved by 1/1/2030. So if the tanks needed for the whole campus are part of the new construction, the tank construction shall be completed and the existing building needs to get NPC 5 rating by 1/1/2030. Before we move on to the other items in the presentation, I want to share the extent of water rationing we have received so far in the evaluation reports so far that we have received. This chart shows the ratio of the proposed water under rationing plan to the normal day-to-day usage. As you can see, there is a good distribution of amount of rationing being proposed. Again, these are not approved reports. These are initial, based on our comments from HCAI and CDPH. Our guess is that some of these outliers, which are proposing significant rationing or proposing very light rationing, might come towards more moderate rationing as reviews continue. Now, let's go over some examples to see some other frequently asked items in or questions in rationing plans. Vendor trucks. A few things to consider. Make sure that the refill connection locations allow for placement of tanker trucks. So the connection point should be accessible. If the tankers are large in size, then having a structural engineer review the loading if it crosses over tunnels or existing underground buildings. When proposing tanker trucks, please indicate the proposed refill time. As we kind of mentioned that in our example and saw how it has an impact on the on-site tank size. Having 2-hour frequency is already pretty limited, considering that you have to do a manual connection, you have to fill, then you have to remove the hose. 2 hours is already a pretty tight time to work with. So we recommend you do your due diligence to see if vendors are available prior to proposing this option. Please provide us the name of the company, contact person and contact number, length of contract, and the quantity of water or wastewater per day that the contractor has agreed to deliver. Clarify how the contract will be monitored. If it is part of the emergency operation plan, to make sure contracts are kept in place and do not lapse. Again, the contract is required when the buildings are ready for NPC 5 rating, but making sure there are reasonable options available will help alleviate any potential risks in the future. When providing wastewater tanks, the connection to the existing sewer tank should be made with sufficient walls to isolate this new holding tank from the external sewer lines in an emergency and prevent backflow. Another important difference is that the water flow is typically pressurized, whereas wastewater flow is by gravity. Now, depending on the facility layout and main sewage line, multiple tanks might be required to accommodate this requirement. We talked about this a little earlier. The size of wastewater tanks might be smaller due to evaporative losses in cooling towers or services that don't discharge water in sewage. Also, there is a plumbing code exception, and one of them is leak-proof bags. They're basically very big bags that you can store on site, and you can just roll it out in case of an emergency. You can use this on different places like parking lots, as long as there are hookups. The important thing to note here is that the minimum size of 24 hours for holding tank is required on site to match the minimum 24 hours on site water tank requirement. These leak-proof bags may be used after the initial 24 hours to meet the 72 hours on-site capacity requirement. Another item that's discussed often is bagging of waste. The plumbing code exception is written for bags intended to be used where the waste system is still in operation, as it will collect waste from downstream of all fixtures. For calculation purposes only, bagging of staff and patient toilets of human waste is not permitted as a reduction strategy for wastewater storage. The red bags at the fixture collect waste before entering the waste system and require bagging at every waste fixture. We take no exceptions to facilities having such procedures implemented during an emergency. All procedures reducing water and wastewater while keeping hospital services functional are best practice and recommended, but for calculation purposes only, this volume cannot be reduced. There's one clarification made to the A5 guide, as I previously mentioned in an earlier slide. The e-power shall be provided for a cooling equipment necessary to maintain temperature and humidity for a minimum of 1 operating room and other spaces as identified in the functional program. This is also an upcoming change in the 2025 mechanical code. I have included the proposed language for your reference. Please make sure to address this requirement when resubmitting the revised water rationing plans. Now let's discuss on-site wells. I'll try to hurry up a little. We're running out of time. Um, Wells are probably the most reliable solutions for emergency water in which the hospital has to rely on itself for providing services. One important aspect of wells is that they are unique to each location. So when submitting water rationing plan with proposal of using wells, please clarify where the well is located and who owns the well. If the well is not on property but located in close vicinity, please identify so in the evaluation report. The review will be on case-by-case basis depending on the unique status of the facility. Another thing to consider is the intent to use the city water supply and have well for emergency use only, and how, if that's the case, how will the transfer to well be transitioned? When working with well water, please address the water quality plan. And for the on-site storage that is required, if there is well, the minimum storage requirement for on-site tank alongside the well is 5,000 gallons or 50 times the number of beds. Again, if the wells are only used in emergencies, then the on-site storage tank requirement may increase depending on the time required to transition from regular source to well source. Just continuing with the well requirements here. As in with typical water tanks, the pumps for wells should be connected to e-power. The building that's housing the pump and filtering equipment must be under HCAI jurisdiction. When using water from wells, please provide analysis showing the maximum gallons per minute usage in a day compared to the typical gallons per minute output from well. Again, if the demand is higher than the well output, the on-site tank needs to accommodate the difference in flow. This slide is just clarifying some stamping and signing requirement. Facility representative has to sign the water rationing plan. This provides an acknowledgement that the water rationing plan was prepared with close interaction with the facility. In some cases where there is no water rationing, then the report can be submitted by the facility representative themselves without a design professional. But for any detailed calculations or fuel calculations which are required for NPC 5 for e-power, a licensed design professional shall stamp and sign them. For some reports where the proposal contains certain methods of water rationing, it shall consider shut-off walls, redirection walls, and the automated or manual processes that might be needed. When proposing shutting irrigation to water or to non-GAC buildings such as MOB structures, the design professional shall review the existing wall system and see if there is any need to consolidate them or to help the facility implement the emergency protocol. In one of the previous slides, we discussed isolating wastewater tank from main sewage to avoid backflow. Similarly, having walls to isolate the main water to avoid contamination in case of water break is also important. Also understanding the automatic fill line to avoid contamination. Any other automated process used using water that need to shut down, some of these could be automated and other might be manual. So understanding the facility infrastructure and helping them update their emergency operational plan is important. This slide is just go over some other items that we have discussed or we see being discussed in water rationing plans. Using of portable cooling units is not an acceptable method for cooling in the first 24 hours, and there's a lot more questions if you do plan to use it beyond 24 for the second and third day. So it will be a review case by case basis. When proposing to use existing on-site tanks, please provide the HCAI project number and the relevant pages from construction documents showing the connection to the building. Clarify if the pumps are on e-power or existing tanks. Without HCAI project numbers will be reviewed again on case-by-case basis. For anything related to self-declaration, please reach out to Patrick Rogers or our seismic compliance unit email address. If you're using bottled water, make sure that bottled water is stored in a compliant GSE building. For Firewatch, please include Firewatch or include water requirement for fire sprinklers. In some cases, you might have existing fire tanks, so just clarify which all buildings the fire tanks serve, and the buildings that are not being served would still need a Firewatch. So all these slides we're discussing HCAI portion of the review. Another important aspect of water rationing plan is CDPH review. CDPH review is required when there is impact on services. In some cases, when the evaluation report is not clear on the impact of services, we did not submit the rationing plans to CDPH. So we highly recommend indicating the impact on services clearly. By not doing so, there could be delay in review. We have a checklist of items CDPH is looking for, and it's under the A5 guide as an appendix. Submission of this checklist is not required, but just provided for your reference. Again, this checklist may seem black and white, but it's not. There's always a case-by-case discussion. So please provide detailed description of your proposal when it comes to impact on services. Some of the typical comments we have seen from CDPH are listed here for your reference. Again, as I mentioned before, every report is and facility is unique, but this will at least give you an idea of some of the items CDPH is closely reviewing, and you can try to address them proactively. One question asked is, what are the measures taken to provide safe and comfortable environment for patients and staff in those areas that won't have space cooling? Example is ICU or NICU. This also ties into infection control where there is no temperature control. What infection control measures will be in place? Terminal cleaning and specialized cleaning shall be addressed. How will cleaning of ORs occur between procedures? How will dialysis service continue in a water emergency? Another critical service to maintain is pharmacy. So addressing if the pharmacy have the capability to provide enough water for oral suspensions, IV medications and medications that require reconstitution during a water emergency. Addressing how does the hospital plan to keep medication stored in areas at appropriate temperatures for the duration of the emergency is another thing that we have seen CDPH ask. For compounding rooms, please provide a plan for temperature control. If the temperature can't be maintained, what's the plan for compounding drugs? Is there going to be an impact on clinical lab services? How is ice provided from sanitary source? Hygiene questions. Again, as you can see, the questions from the questions and the checklist from CDPH, these are basic operational questions. If there are impact to services, please provide the plan for CDPH review. Most of you might be aware of this, but for those who are not, we have frequently asked questions webpage with different categories. Some of these frequently asked questions discuss NPC 5 topics. I'm not going to go in the detail of these FAQs because we already covered them in our previous NPC 5 webinar in 2023. The slide is just summarizing the current NPC 5 related FAQs, and we have on our website. Same thing over here. One FAQ I want to highlight is the question on emergency fuel quantity, which was asked very often. Since our presentation was for water rationing plan, we did not get into the details of this question. But we have this discussed in detail with an example on our website. Note the code does not provide provision or have an exception for 24 hours of fuel on site with vendors. The amount of fuel requirement as clarified in this FAQ shall be present on site. I know it's 10. I just have 2 more slides probably, so I should not take too much time. I'll try to go through quickly. Under the issued remarks letter, we have included a brief summary of the proposed work that looks something like this, shown on the slide. Typically, it will summarize the total beds, existing tank sizes, proposed tank sizes, vendor requirements, etc. The intent is to summarize the scope of work as listed in the evaluation report. If you see anything that's not consistent with the evaluation report, please let us know when submitting the comment responses. The final goal of the evaluation report is to get a proposed retrofit acceptable letter. This project under which evaluation report was submitted will remain open, and the same project number will be used at the end of the construction by design professional of record to submit a reconciliation report showing the completion of all NPC 5 related work to achieve NPC 5. Keeping track of all the related projects is important as this might be accomplished under multiple projects. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you again for your time, and I hope this presentation was helpful. Feel free to reach out to myself or our email address listed here, and we'll get back to you on all the questions you have. Kelly, I'll hand it back to you at this point.
So this brings us to the end of our presentation. We hope you found this webinar to be helpful. Please remember, if you didn't download the PDF handout, you may do so now by going to the handout section of the Go-To panel. Alternatively, the slide handout will be available on the HCAI website in approximately 1 week. Also, today's session has been recorded and will be available on the HCAI website under Building Safety and Finance, Training and Education in approximately 2 weeks. If you have any questions about this presentation, please email Seismic Compliance Unit at hci.ca.gov. It's been a pleasure being with you, all of you today, and thank you for doing your part in providing access to safe, quality healthcare environments throughout the state of California. Have a nice day.